Many decades ago, I remember having I had a decade with someone. I had a discussion with someone regarding a particular political process. And in the argument, the person, a much older person than myself, finally came back and said, look, if you really want to know the truth, arguing about all the things in the media, arguing about the policy or the lack of policy or what the policy is going to do and what the policy is not going to do, just do one thing and you'll always know the truth behind what's happening. Not what you think is happening, not what they tell you is happening, but what's really happening and why. And that is follow the money. Just follow the money. As I'm growing older and I'm watching some of the sleight of hand of political and religious and humanistic, socialistic gerrymandering, peoples of multiple groups and nations and religious ideologies being moved all over the world. It's almost like a checkers game or dominoes where you shuffle up all the players and you put them in a different place and it suddenly gives everything new meaning and new value. And the value is being reassigned as the players and the pieces are being moved. And it's really kind of unusual, but you know that I see things, I watch YouTube all the time. I use it as a research tool. I know it can't be trusted as quantitative research. I get that. But man, if you are watching anything other than bunnies and kittens and dogs and America's Funniest Home Videos and other people video gaming, you dig into YouTube a little bit, you can see some really unusual ideas expressed. It has become a platform where people who have an opinion and a voice, and some of them a great education, but could never make it in the national media or wouldn't be acceptable in the national media because of their ideas, their beliefs, and what they have to say. YouTube has become a great platform for them, just like Facebook Live has. And that tool alone gives us access to see and hear information that's going on around us every day that, because of the way that we consume media, because of the way that we gain our knowledge and information, because there are gatekeepers at every level, just things that the everyday Joe is not privy to. Just one that I've noticed over the last few days. I spent some time as a firefighter in the U.S. Air Force. And we used to watch the contrails behind especially the F4s. They were really bad about it because especially in England, there's a lot of humidity in the air, and those things were like a flying freight train. They were just a beast of an aircraft. And so the contrails, the condensation trails that followed those aircraft was pretty significant. In the early mornings when they would take off, you could see them for probably 60, 75 feet behind the aircraft once it started to reach altitude. And then I noticed that sometimes you would see it with passenger jets. But recently I've noticed what you would think would be a contrail, meaning a condensation trail from the heat vapor of the engine and the process of burning fuel at a high rate of speed. But now they stay in the sky for hours, sometimes days. I mean, you see the white line across the sky and you're looking for the jet, like, you know, they're usually not far apart. But now those trails in the sky are staying. And so I started watching some videos on it just to see if somebody else had noticed that. And lo and behold, there's a whole subculture out there of these stripes in the sky. And they're not contrails, condensation trails. They're chemtrails. They're chemicals that are actually being released into the atmosphere. Some say to curb global warming. Some say they're the activator part of the HARP system. They're actually the ionization of the atmosphere that's necessary for the electronic systems to work in the sky and the atmosphere to create high pressure zones and move low pressure zones. And so there are different components, but nobody's really talking about, is it a bad idea to put stuff like that in the sky? I mean, whatever happened to the whole acid rain thing that we were most concerned with back in the 70s and 80s, that, you know, everybody's going to die from this acid rain because there's stuff in the air like pollution and carbon monoxide, and it's coming from our cars and the rain's coming through it and coming back down to the earth. And so my wife and I did a little just YouTube search on what is in those white stripes in the sky and what happens when it comes back down. It turns out It's nano-sized aluminum. Aluminum, which has been directly linked to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ADHD, bipolar disorder, other memory losses, because it actually gets into the olfactory glands in your, the olfactory nerve in your nose when you breathe it through the air, and affects the way your brain remembers things. But we're spraying it by the hundreds of thousands of tons into the sky to rain down on all the people? Why would you do that? Follow the money? Well, if you follow the money far enough, you find that the people who are paying for that, besides the American taxpayer, and the taxpayers in other countries, because Russia and Germany have been doing it as well, are large organizations whose most prominent theory in public policy is the earth is overpopulated. We just have too many people. Well, you can't just go around killing people, but you could exterminate them from the sky, I guess, like crop dusting for humans? I don't know. In case abortion isn't keeping up with the death rate over the birth rate population control wise, then I guess we just need to use an aerosol from the sky to help. Does that even sound sane? It makes me sound like I'm crazy just saying it, doesn't it? But then you've got the fluoride in the water and red dye number 2, and the list just goes on and on and on of all the chemicals that are out there that they're in our everyday society, and we don't even think about the impact that they have. Not to mention the debate over immunizations or no immunizations, and what's the long-term ill effect of the carrier molecules they put inside the immunization to carry. Oh my gosh, there's just too much. Oh, but then there's, like Canada's experiencing right now, a complete overrun of their nation with people who are different in culture, different religious ideologies, different in political ideologies. They have, in the last 2 decades, taken in more people who, for the last 200 years, would have been on the restricted list than they have in the history of their country. And so now their voting bloc has changed, and their way of life has changed, and their ideologies have changed, and their political persuasions have changed, and what is a man, what is a woman has changed. One of the videos I watched on YouTube was a fascinating interview with students on a college campus. And the guy just walked up at random, picking college kids, and said, hey, if I said I was a woman, would you have a problem with that? Obviously born with male gender. And every one of the students said, no, I have no problem with that. So he continued down the list. What if I said I was a Chinese woman? Nobody had a problem with that. What if I said I was a Chinese 7-year-old girl? Now, age became the thing that they kind of got stuck in their craw, and they couldn't just easily say, well, there's evidence to the contrary. And so some of them started to back up a little bit and go, well, you know, if you said you were Chinese and you said you were a woman, I guess I couldn't argue that, but to say that you're 7, that there's a lot more evidence that you're not. He said, well, what if I said I was 6'5"? And they're like, but you're not 6'5". He said, oh, I know, I'm 5'9", but what if I wanted to be 6'5"? What if I just said that I was 6'5"? If I believed I was 6'5" and a Chinese woman who's 7 years old? And the audacity of that statement is ludicrous on its own. And yet there were some people who could muster a swallow and say, okay, if you want to be a 7-year-old, 6'5" Chinese girl, then fine. No, it's not fine. All the evidence points to the contrary. Not female, not Chinese, not 6'5". He was a 5'9" white guy. It's pretty easy to see. The problem that this vagary of fact and value has created, I think, goes really, really deep. The fact that our population control centers, otherwise known as governments, have decided to completely shuffle the board of humanity from a value standpoint, from a national standpoint, from a religious standpoint, from a male and female standpoint. We can't even identify who we are because there's some drive to make us all homogenized, exactly the same everywhere on the planet, equal in income, equal in education, equal in status, equal in authority, equal in gender, equal in religious ideologies, equal in nationality, all exactly the same. And I have no problem with equality, but equality and difference are not mutually exclusive. Equality and difference are not mutually exclusive. And I think that's part of the problem that we're coming to. But there's a lot of ways that we're coming to it. The dumbing down of a society, if you think that our education system is a better education system than it was 5 decades ago, you need to do more reading. If you think the quality of education that our children are graduating from high schools and colleges with today is better than it was 5 decades ago, sure, there's some knowledge that we have now that they didn't have then. There are new things that have been invented. There was no such thing as an iPhone technician 5 decades ago. It didn't exist. The basic way in which we accumulate knowledge and presumably assimilate knowledge has evolved and changed as well. And I still have to go back to that same question the old man asked me. Can you follow the money? Well, maybe the money at this point isn't cash. Maybe the money is a parenthetical money or a symbolized money. Maybe it's a currency exchange like Bitcoin, or a currency exchange like a foreign currency exchange, or maybe it's an exchange of something even beyond monetization. See, there's also a Christian song that's been around for, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 decades as well. But I think it was a remake by Twyla Paris. That one line in the song said, if you can't see his hands, trust his heart. You can't see his hands, trust his heart. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment, and let's remove God from the context, and let's ask the question, how often is that true of other entities, persons that you know? If you can't see the hand of the guy who's robbing you, you better trust his heart. If you've known him to be a thief in the past, why would he be any different now? If everything indicates to the fact that he wants to rip you off, just because you can't see how he's ripping you off doesn't mean he's not. You follow me? If the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things and no one can know it, the actions are going to follow that. From the depths of a man's heart he speaks. As a man think in his heart, so is he. The mind and the mouth, they seem to go together. And those things that you're thinking that eventually become your sayings, which eventually becomes your belief systems, which eventually become your behavior, which eventually becomes your identity. See, if we follow the money, the currency, the exchange deep enough, what we find is the nature of the person or the entity is more indicative of the outcome than any of the surface manipulative behavior that you might be seeing right now. If we ask the question, why would anyone put chemtrails in the sky if they knew that it was going to cause brain damage? Well, maybe in their estimation of things, brain damage is a small price to pay. The loss of life of 50 million people is a small price to pay. Who cares? If I can achieve my end goal, perhaps the currency is loss of life. You follow me yet? See, there's an entity out there who looks at all of humanity, regardless of race, regardless of age, regardless of sex, regardless of national origin, regardless of political persuasions, regardless of religious affiliations. There's an entity that looks at every living being on the planet, known as a Homo sapien, with the intent to destroy them. Why? Because they are the highest gift. Whatever means necessary that brings the human race to distinction That's what this entity desires. Follow the money. If you can't see his hand, trust his heart. When Jesus confronted particular religious leaders in the days that he lived on the earth, he said to some of them, "You are of your father, the father of all lies. He can't tell the truth." And as I see the manipulation, whether it's from the media or the education system, the medical system, or the political system, or the different systems of our world, that manipulation seems to be at an accelerated pace, moving to the end, the destruction of the identity of a human being. I remember when I was preaching on the streets of England in my 20s, I remember encountering a young man who was homeless, and we had a long conversation, and I asked him, "Why don't you go home? Why don't you go back to your parents' place?" And he looked at me with these mysterious eyes as if to say, "Are you that stupid?" He said, I don't have a home. My parents don't have a home. My parents' parents don't have a home. That's why we're on the streets." And I thought, that's mind-boggling. I don't understand. I mean, I've known runaways as a teenager, and remember, I was in my 20s. I'd known runaways as a teenager who, they would run away from home. They'd be gone for 2 or 3 weeks, and they'd, sleep at different friends' houses, and et cetera, and then eventually go back to their parents' house. And their time as a runaway was short, a matter of weeks or months, maybe. In my small hometown, I don't know that there were homeless then. I'm not saying there weren't. I'm just saying I didn't know any. Because everybody I knew that was out of a home was between homes. They were about to be moving in with somebody else. And we had some of those teenagers that came and stayed with us for weeks, months, years at a time. It's a different thing to understand that there's no place to call home. There's no place to go back to. But then an analogy came to my head, and I said, well, what if a black limo pulled up here on this curb while we're sitting here talking? And a guy opened the door and he said, "I'm your father. And I have a mansion beyond belief with your name on it. And all you have to do is climb in and call me Dad. And everything I have is yours." How would you react to that? He looked at me with kind of a tear in the corner of his eye, and he said, "It's a great pipe dream, but it'll never happen. And because I know it will never happen, I don't even allow myself to imagine it." Today's whole discussion can be summed up in a really frightening reality. There is an enemy to the human soul whose only job it is to leave every human being just like that young homeless man, believing in his heart that there is no chance that it will ever get better, believing in his heart that there is no father who loves him, believing in his heart that no one cares to give him better, to love him more than what he has right this minute. And the purpose of that agenda is to separate every human from their Father and Creator. And sometimes that agenda is served best through the medical annihilation of babies. Sometimes that agenda, separating each individual human from his Father Creator, is served best through political whims, through war, through riots in the street, through gang violence, through drug activity. See, in the end game, the chemtrails in the sky and the marijuana on the streets, sadly, some evidence points to the fact that they have the same origin, and that is our government. But nonetheless, they still have the same end game. Regardless of the tool that brought them to you, they are the agenda of one enemy. One enemy of humanity who doesn't want each individual son and daughter of an almighty God to know that The reality that a rich man one day will roll up in front of them and say, I have a mansion with your name on it. All you have to do is admit that you're my child. But see, that's exactly the promise of heaven. It's exactly what Jesus said. I'm leaving here to go prepare a place for you. If it wasn't true, I wouldn't have told you that. But it is. And I'm going to prepare a place for you to come and spend the rest of your life with me, the rest of eternity with me. Now, that doesn't mean that everything on earth becomes rainbows and unicorns. It simply means that in the move from this life to the next, that you have a proper place, that you have a Father who cares about you. And oh yeah, his caring about you now will make a dramatic change in your life. If you change your way of thinking to his way of thinking, the way you live will be entirely different. The way you interact with human beings will be entirely different. The way you value humanity will be entirely different. Entirely different. But all of the distractions and all of the destruction and all the political gerrymandering and all the religious moving of the dice and the dominoes around on the table, it's meant to be a lifelong commitment of distraction for human beings to lose sight of the fact that an almighty God created them in his image. And his ultimate desire is to make them into the image of his Son and bring them home into his presence. How's that for a twist on what you thought I was going to talk about today? The older I get, the more I realize time and life are short. And every day we're running out of it, not getting more. It may be 1,000 years from now before this earth comes to an end and humanity is destroyed ultimately. Let me rephrase that, because I don't believe humanity will be destroyed. Humanity is created in the image of God. Therefore, it is not eternal but everlasting. It had a beginning point but will not have an end. Not in the same form that we are right now, because we're spirit beings living a fleshly experience. But our spirits will live forever. The only real question is, in heaven or in hell? And yes, I firmly believe what I'm saying. If you're looking at the political gerrymandering, if you're looking at all the world politics and world economics that are being shifted around, and it seems like only a few puppet masters are controlling all the strings, from chemtrails to diets to medical pharmaceuticals to the types of things that are being taught to our kids in schools and on college campuses, to the types of things that we see on the media versus what's being hidden from us. If you think there's a chance that there's a puppet master behind all that, yes, his name is Lucifer. He was at one time the highest angel. And his only intent is to steal from God the glory that belongs to God. And his greatest mechanism for doing that is to take you from the Father. So yeah, there's a puppet master behind all of that. And he has a lot of tools that he uses at the individual, the government, the political, the news levels. But in the end, if you follow the money, the currency, the exchange, you can trust his heart when you can't see his hand. He's conniving and sneaky and manipulative. He's a liar. But he only has one game. He only has one goal. And he only has one agenda. And that is to steal you from the Father. Think about that as you go through your day. Zoom out of the details of life and look at it from a macrocosm. And I think you'll be encouraged to know that those who are in the hand of the Father, there's no way to remove them. That's what it says. If you're curious about this conversation and you want to have a little more in-depth personal conversation about it, send me a private message. I'll be glad to chat with you. I'm J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.